When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm Oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Today we're going to talk about something different that will help us move toward a firmer definition, maybe, of oldish. What's the difference between oldish and old, and how can you tell? And we hope to be able to answer some of those questions today, maybe a little bit. This conversation was stimulated by the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden the other day. We want to talk a little bit about, are these two guys oldish, or are they old? Or does it matter? Or can we tell? Or things like that. And we'll do our best to keep our partisanship out of it to the extent that we can. But I'm pretty sure that I will fail at that. So there's a heads up there. Be prepared for some failure of my trying to keep the partisanship out. But that's something we think that is kind of important, because the definition that we've been using all along is we're of an age, people who are oldish are of an age where previous generations and in our generation as well, people have shifted over into being old. They shifted into the rocking chair. They shifted into the not trying new things. And we want to be clear, I think, that when we say rocking chair and sitting in front of the television and things like that, that's not judgmental, because I know people who sit in a rocking chair and are still vibrant, still alive, but a rocking chair is a comfortable place to sit. That's not what we're saying. We want to explore that question a little bit based on what we saw in the debates the other day.
I think it's great timing. It's a wonderful opportunity to look at how society in generations past, as you were just saying, but in generations past thought of aging before the debate, what people were saying about what they were going to be looking for in Trump and Biden to see that they were capable people. And then what the pundits have been saying post the debate about how especially Biden presented, it really surprised me that we're still in a lot of ways stuck in the views of what it means to be old and versus oldish. Very disappointed about that.
I feel that same way. In the lead up to the debate, and for the last several months, it seems as though the Trump campaign has been trying to hammer home the point that Joe Biden is an old man. That's what we hear from them. All the news machines are talking about Biden as an old man, to the extent that just prior to the last 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a little longer than that, we were starting to hear that the Trump campaign was protecting Trump against a strong performance from Biden by implying that he was going to be jacked up, that he was going to be given drugs. The silliest one I heard was he's going to be all jacked up on Mountain Dew and less just caffeine. So what? So I was convinced Biden was going to come out all pumped up and raring to go. And I wasn't going to blame drugs for that. And Trump and some of the other Republicans were saying things even like he's going to be injected with performance-enhancing drugs. And I'm like, I kind of doubt that. He's not that old. My opinion on that old has changed a bit in the last few years. He's only 7 years older than I am. So I was anticipating that Biden would come out really strong and that Trump would look older by comparison, but neither of those things happened. Biden came out and for whatever reason looked feeble. That's the word that came to my mind when I saw it. I didn't watch the debate live all the way through because I couldn't bear to. I tuned in for a few minutes here and a few minutes there, and what I saw was Biden looking feeble, which I found quite depressing. I was texting with a friend of mine, and I asked her if she was watching, and she said just in bits because she would watch until she was despondent. And my response, watching the two of them, and it wasn't just Biden, my response watching the two of them was, I'm already despondent. Watching these two, these are the best that we can find represented on that stage. I spent a lot of time talking myself down from that, or I guess maybe from that. We're not electing the debater-in-chief. We're electing the commander-in-chief and the chief executive of our government, the commander-in-chief of our armed forces and the commander-in-chief of our government. So how they perform in that 90 minutes under the spotlight with people asking them questions for them to respond to. The moderators were, are they good at their jobs and doing all of that? I did talk myself off the ledge, so to speak, but it wasn't really until the next day. So I was talking with somebody today who said, Joe Biden had to help Joe off the stage, which would be old. That would certainly have an old look to it. The Democrats are saying, well, he was sick, and that's why he was hoarse. He wasn't feeling well. He had a cold. Well, lots of people get cold and appear more feeble maybe than they really are. When I watched the first couple of minutes, and when Trump walked out, my first thought was, that's an old guy too. They both walked out at the same time, and I was looking back and forth between the two of them, and Trump walked out, and he was bent over and a little shuffly. He bound out onto the stage, all exuberant. He kind of shuffled out onto the stage. He didn't present as physically decrepit while he was talking, but that's mostly not what we're wondering about anyway. So what was your response to that? What was your first impression there?
I only watched a few minutes also because I couldn't bear it. But my first impression was I was so disappointed to see Biden looking that way. And I don't think I had too many thoughts about it as far as what we're talking about now. But I think when I look back at that, I think there's so much mixed up in it, and that reaction. Like, I want him to look great because I want him to be reelected. So it is getting into partisanship. I do want him to get reelected. And so I don't want him to present that way. I'm also aware that he doesn't always present that way, and that there's many times when you can see him in interviews and making speeches where he's very animated and energetic. I also thought about how, and you and I were just talking about this a few minutes ago, that I'm thinking about how before President Kennedy was the first president that was part of the TV personality experience, that the candidate needed to look good and look handsome and look energetic and be well-spoken and all of those things. But before that, our presidents didn't have to look a certain way on camera. They had to perform. They had to have an administration that accomplished things. And then the American people could look and say, okay, you accomplished this, but you didn't do that, and I want you to do that, or you accomplished this, and that's exactly what I want the president to do. So I like you. They weren't thinking, oh, you looked kind of old, or your voice wasn't commanding.
Now, interestingly enough, though, the Kennedy-Nixon debate was the first televised debate, and people even now say that Nixon lost the election because how he looked during that debate. He was sweaty. His eyes were darting around, so he looked sweaty and shifty. And so people say that he lost the debate, and because of that, he lost the election. I think that's an overstate, but that's what we do, is we overstate things. But people still say that. And look what happened to Nixon. And he was sweaty and shifty, it turned out.
I do think it's true. And I think that's what's happening with Biden. Not that he's going to lose, but that people put so much meaning into how, so for this example, how Biden presented. I haven't heard anybody in the post-debate commentary talk about he looked that way, but let's just think about what his administration has accomplished in the past 3.5 years. So that's one thing. And then I'm thinking about how, as you and I talk about over time, now in our third year of our podcast, oldishness versus being old. I think in this situation, it's a combination of he is old and he's 81. At some point, we're old, and he's oldish in that he's the president of the United States. He is driven, he's accomplished, he's taking on challenges like running for president again. He's doing all the things that you and I have been talking about as far as what does it mean to really be in your life as you age. I don't think you can, I mean, on one level, I don't think you can be more in your life in one way than to be president of the United States and or running for president of the United States. So I think that there's this, it all gets mixed in together of, our meaning our society's biases around aging, and that's impacting how people are looking at him as opposed to, and I also want to say that during this time that he's been running for president, I've seen a few ads from people like Richard Gere, Morgan Freeman, who've said, I'm 80. And I'm not sure if I have those names right, but I think it was both of them. I'm 80. And it's like, yeah, we don't do this. Well, I mean, it is hard for actors as they get older, especially women. I thought it was really powerful. I mean, when I saw if it was Richard Gere, if I'm remembering correctly, and I thought, oh, if he suddenly came out with a new movie, I wouldn't be thinking, I think you're a little bit too old to be doing this movie. Or Morgan Freeman. I think you probably should have stopped by now. Obviously, it's different kind of work, but the other point that I think is so important is that we've lost sight in our society and our culture about what does it mean to be wise. And that I think for me, it's a huge piece of people as they age becoming invisible. This is just in general, just typical people, that we become invisible. We're just white-haired, old-looking people, and there's no thought of, boy, I wonder what that person has to teach me. I wonder what that person's life story has taught them. I want to learn about that. I want to hear them talk. They have a lot to say. We don't tend to think that way.
Both have a very large oldish behavior in that they are running for president. The hardest job you can imagine. Biden is doing it while also being president and having the hardest job you can imagine. And one of the things that Americans have talked about over the years is you look at men, and so far it's only men, as you know, but you look at a man who gets elected president, and then you look at Barack Obama. You look like a young man. Everybody's like, oh, he's too young to do this. Then 8 years later, it's like, oh man, I can't imagine the pressures of that job. And it's not like he's just sitting there doing nothing. He's busy all day long, which I think actually may have contributed to how he was the other day. I'm almost 74, and I know that I don't want anybody talking to me on camera at 9 o'clock at night. And I'm not even doing much. I'm playing pickleball and hanging out. And, but 9 o'clock at night, I'm ready for bed because I can't remember what's going on. And so for Biden to have been the president of the United States all day that day, with all the stuff that's going to be coming at him from everywhere, and he probably didn't get a nap in, so he's probably a little bit tired out at that point. I don't want to fall into the same pattern that everybody else has about how Biden looked really old and Trump didn't, because our question is, these guys are both exhibiting oldish behaviors, but are they also exhibiting old behaviors? And does that make any difference in real life? I was talking to a friend of mine today, and it's not about whether you can debate or not. It's not about whether you can do everything that needs to be done as president by yourself. It's about the team that you put together. And are these guys showing signs of putting together teams that will be responsible and that will have the best interest of the country forefront? And neither one of them is going to be 100% successful at that. We know that. But are they going to be able to manage that giant team like that? I don't think their age has anything to do with it. Biden has been managing a pretty good team. Trump took the credit for everything, including stuff that Obama and Biden did. And I guess I'm a little partisan myself, but the team that he had put together wasn't experienced people who knew what to do in terms of how the government works and about how to get things done. The infrastructure bill, for example, Trump made several announcements when he was president. This is infrastructure week. We're going to do this huge infrastructure thing like nobody's ever seen before in the history of our country. And he said that many times during the course of his presidency and couldn't get it done because of the divisiveness in the Congress. Biden came in and very quickly, in a divided Congress, got the infrastructure bill passed, the CHIPS Act passed to bring high-tech manufacturing jobs back to the states, and some of the other things, not because he was the strongest man, but because his experience and his team's experience in working in government. Biden could call up all the senators. He could say, hey, Mitch. And that's an important part of being the president of the United States. You're the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and I don't want to go too far down that road. And you're the chief executive, not the king, not the boss, not the person who makes every single decision, but the person who puts in place the team and then signs off on decisions that his team makes. That's how chief executives work. And they make the tough decisions. If something has to be done, that's a tough decision. The chief executive makes that. And I think both of these guys exhibit the ability to do that in their oldishness. In other words, one of the characteristics of old that's in my head is kind of giving up. I'm not doing that anymore. It's kind of how I feel some days. Somebody the other day said to me, oh, well, let's start this business. And I said, not a chance. I'm not doing that again. Somebody offered me a job a few weeks ago. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. And I still think of myself as oldish, but these guys want to be in that position. So I think regardless of how they present in any given moment, regardless of how I feel about what their policies might be, their energy and activity level are oldish, not old. That's kind of how I feel about it. But neither one of them said, I'm done being president. I'm going to just go play golf. Neither one of them has said anything like that. They both are saying, I want to do this, and I'm the best man for the job. And that's an oldish thing to say. I guess what I'm saying is that it seems likely right now that the next president of the United States is going to be oldish.
Yes. And many people have lost track of that and are looking at them both as old. So I have a confession to make, which is there is a big part of me that wishes the Democratic candidate was younger. And I'm sitting here thinking, what is that about for me? As we've been talking, I was thinking, okay, there's people like Pete Buttigieg, who I am in love with. I just think I can't wait for him to be president. I know he's going to be someday. So he's out there. And then there's Cory Booker, who I'm also in love with. And I just think he's fantastic and so smart. I think he'd make a great president. There's Elizabeth Warren, who's so capable and so smart. But why is it that I do have this feeling like, if it were up to me, I would be choosing, if someone said, okay, you choose who the Democratic candidate is going to be, I would probably choose someone younger. So I don't know what that means as far as, is there part of this bias is in me too?
Yeah, I was thinking about that today also. The fact is that the stresses of that job, I'm surprised that both of these guys are still alive, to tell you the truth. And so because of the stresses of that job, there's a better than even chance, I think, that neither one of them would finish out their term. So I think that I have no idea who Trump is going to choose as his running mate. But if I were the Democrats, I would be saying Biden is the best man for the job. And if something happens to him, Kamala Harris is the best person for the job to step into place. I would want to say, God bless Joe Biden. And if we're lucky, Joe Biden's going to make it through. But if something happens, Kamala Harris is standing there and she is not even up to Oldish. None of the people that you mentioned either are up to, and she knows exactly what that job looks like. She came very close.
Yes.
I think that if it were in the last election, I think that if it had been anybody but Trump that they were running against, I think she might have been the Democratic nominee. I think that the Democrats made a decision that, and I don't think Biden wanted to run it. He'd already said he wasn't going to do it. But I think the Democrats made a decision that the only person that they knew of who could beat Trump was Biden, because he already had a big coalition, big engine, and he also had the smiling faces of Barack and Michelle going along with him. And I think if it hadn't been for that, Kamala might have been the nominee, and who knows how that would have turned out, because you don't know. But if it were me running the show, I would say Joe Biden is our man, and if anything does happen to him, there's somebody standing right there who can pick up the job without hesitation and can carry it on, just like Lyndon Johnson did. You don't have to say that Biden is old to think that something could happen. Just like Lyndon Johnson picked it up without missing a step because he was experienced in the government, knew how it worked, he knew how the job was going to work. Lyndon Johnson had been treated like every other vice president has been. Keep him in the shadows. They're not running the country. The president is, and we send him off doing stuff. But in a matter of seconds, he went from being the vice president, but he had many, many years of experience in the government. He knew everything. Kamala Harris knows all of these people. So she can step in and understand what the issues are right away. So I think that's how I would be pushing that. Not because he's old, but because stuff happens.
Well, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I wish that there were younger people running in both things. I can just barely make it on the pickleball court, and let alone run a country. I wouldn't take that job on.
I agree. And what you were saying about Kamala and Biden, and we don't know who the potential vice president would be with Trump, but with Kamala, that I feel like any president that's successful, like I think Biden has been, it's so much about his leadership in building an administration that can do all of this, because no one, no matter how young or old or oldish they are, no one person can do all of that anyway. And so I've been impressed over these last, even when he was running for president, so 4 years, whatever, how much of a team they made up, and then an administration of young people and old people, older people, and all different kinds of abilities and whatever. So that Kamala would be picking that up. She wouldn't be starting from scratch trying to create an administration. She would be just taking over the helm of the administration that's there. As far as the actual election, it feels like ultimately, and this is probably obvious, it comes down to what each of these two people believe, what their stance is on various things, and who wants which person and which thinking, which values to be running the country. But now it's being made into this age thing. And to me, it's tiring, and it's so off track of, I heard someone saying Biden might be old, but then the other candidate is old and an idiot. It's like, here's two old people, oldish in some ways, old, and from my perspective, the other one is an idiot.
Yeah.
There, I said it.
Yes. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not sure idiot's the right word.
We don't know how much of what's going on is calculated and how much of it is something else.
But I think we agree that in terms of the definition of oldishness, both of these guys are oldish. And in terms of old, maybe they're on the older side of oldishness because of their physical condition or whatever, but their spirits are up, their creativity is up, their willingness to take on giant jobs, to do things differently, to do stuff for the benefit of others, however they see it, to pick up this big thing. They're both willing to take on that job, which I think is a sign of oldishness, and old people wouldn't do it. Old people would retire to the ranch.
I just have to say that I'm not sure if Trump is doing this for the benefit of other people, but I would say that he's definitely driven, which is oldish, and he's not giving up, which is oldish, and he's not ready to say, I'm too old for this, which isn't, like you were saying earlier, isn't bad. It's not a judgment, but the fact that he is saying, I'm here, I'm in it, I'm going to get reelected. He's very driven.
So oldish he is. So I think that's how we come down on the oldish debate.
I agree.
So we agree once again. And once again, this has been great, Janet. I always enjoy these conversations. And, before we started talking today, as we often do, we talked about what are we going to talk about, and started off with, well, I don't know, we could talk about this kind of stuff and that kind of stuff. And then once we get going, the conversation rolls and we go where the conversation leads us. And I always learn stuff. And I always feel oldisher when we've done one of our podcasts. I feel oldisher. I don't feel old anymore. I feel oldisher, and I'm happier about doing this enterprise with you. And so that's all good.
Yes. Thank you for those sweet words. I completely concur. This is definitely something oldish that we are doing that continues to feed our oldishness as opposed to being old.
Well, goodbye, Janet.
Bye, Greg. Till next time.
Till next time.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We enjoyed our visit and hope you did too. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there too if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.